Good day. Welcome to our IG as a Service live demo. My name is Christian Swanepoel and I represent a partner organization of Micro Focus called Secured. Today we'll be taking you through a live demonstration of the IG as a Service instances. But firstly, historically, we as a partner organization, we have serviced clients internationally as well as locally, based out of South Africa. And we were also part of the first implementation teams back when Access Review 1.0 was deployed, and this was also one of the first in Africa deployments. From a IG as a service component, we were also one of the first teams to actually onboard and deploy and provide solutions on IG as a service. With me, I've got Brendan Meyer, and Brendan will be taking us through the actual demonstration. In this session today, we will show you the benefits that a quick solution realization can be achieved using the IG as a Service components and IG as a Service cloud instances. This approach and ease of deployment will allow organizations to drastically reduce complex governance projects into more manageable solutions inside the organization. I'd like to now hand over to Brendan, who will take us through how easily this can be achieved.
Hi, my name is Brendan, and in our session today, I want to have a brief discussion around our identity governance as a service offering. I want to also demo to you how we help our clients around the world. Now, in the last year, we've seen our clients face many new challenges, but two of the biggest challenges we have seen firsthand is the increased vulnerability through remote work and the persistent challenge to cloud adoption. Our IG as a service offering manages and governs digital identities and enforces appropriate access across your enterprise. With a unified governance framework, organizations can determine who has access to which resources and whether the access is appropriate. Scaling to billions of identities, our IGA automates and streamlines processes related to access requests, access certification, identity lifecycle management, provisioning, and compliance reporting. Now, our IGA detects changes as they happen in the connected systems and adjusts security controls for continuous compliance, thus reducing risks and increasing efficiency across your organization. But enough said, let me show you. Okay, so first things first, I just want to quickly talk through this diagram just so that we understand how everything fits together. So we have our IG or identity governance service. The service is then built around or built on AWS. Directly linked into that, we have our authentication service or advanced authentication service. This is a MFA or multi-factor authentication framework that helps us or facilitates authentications into identity governance. We then have our SAAS data sources. The SAAS data sources is then connected into IG, and we collect account and permission information from those cloud-based applications. Then for your on-premise applications, we have a component called CloudBridge. The CloudBridge component is a Docker instance, and it facilitates communication between your on-prem applications, and that just allows us then to collect accounts and permissions from your on-premise applications. So, welcome to the dashboard of identity governance as a service. The best way to start our journey here is to start it with an identity. Now, the identities of your organization normally comes from a authoritative source, and nothing's different here with identity governance. We start our journey the same way. So we need to first collect identity information. Now, from here we can then collect identities from multiple sources, and this is normally your organization's authoritative sources, be it SAP or an HR source. In this example, we just connected it to our identity management system, and it acts as our authoritative source for us to get identities into our identity governance solution. So how do these identities then now look? You'll notice here there's all the identities all 1014 of them. We can filter them out. We can search for them. We can add a filter. We can change the view and get more information on this. But essentially, this provides us then with a unified identity. But what do we do with the identity? The next part is then obviously we need to figure out which identity has access to what. And that brings us then to our applications. Now, our applications is then, can be your cloud or SaaS based applications or your on-premise applications. And this essentially allows us then to collect account information and permission information. And then again, from a view perspective, identity governance then provides you a way to link all your accounts and permissions into one identity. So a good example would be here we'll use this user for instance of this identity. And from here you can see this identity has a risk score of 40. You can define the risk scores and define how a user's score is calculated. And from here, we'll also then be able to see who the supervisor or manager of this user is. The purpose for the supervisor as well is then from a review perspective is IT does not necessarily know who has to have access to what. The managers normally know they should have the following access, and then reviews can then incorporate the manager to review their staff members' accounts. So in this example, you'll notice this user has 4 groups assigned to it. Those 4 groups is also then pulled through as a permission here. And then we have defined a business role over here, and this is product specialist is defined as a business role. Now, you can define business roles per department. It all depends on your organization, how you would like to define the business roles. We also define technical roles. That's normally what you can do on that system or on an application. That can then also then be defined inside your organization. But let's quickly jump in to how we can add an application here. So in our on-premise environment, we have our domain controller here, and obviously Active Directory is then now running on our domain controller. We now want to pull in Active Directory as an application, and the same from a group perspective. We want to pull in the groups or your Active Directory groups into our identity governance solution. So how do we go to work? First things first is then we need to define, because our Active Directory is sitting on premises, it needs to be facilitated with, or communication needs to be facilitated through our cloud bridge, and that can then be defined over here. So here we can then add multiple data sources or data source connections, and here you'll see I have defined our Active Directory, and it creates and gives us a unique ID, and you can see it's then in our data center over there. Once we've now defined that, now we can go and say, listen, let's add a application source. So we'll call it AD and AD accounts and groups. Okay. We can add some advanced information, specify categories. We can say who the administrator is. For this purpose, I'll just make our system admin, which is Andrew, the administrator, and we have a Taylor Bruce, which is then essentially the owner, which is then the architect or product design architect, and a manager, which will then be the owner of Active Directory. Here you can then specify who the vendor is. Okay, and we can add some vendor information, licensing types, IP addresses. Now just to add information here, this is DC1, and I think that should be enough information for now. And we now start the process of configuring Active Directory. So let's add some information. First things first, we want to collect, and you'll notice we have multiple collectors from JDBC to Active Directory to LDAP, SharePoint, Salesforce, SAP. All these collectors then allow us to normalize and essentially pass the information through into identity governance. So we want to collect AD accounts. We'll call it the AD account collector. Okay, and now we can specify the parameters. Now you'll see here you can specify username and password and certificate. But are we using the cloud bridge? Yes, we are. And here we'll now have an option called MFAD, and that is where we specify that data source. And now I can just add the IP address. Okay, and now that's added. The thing over here is we have not specified a username and password. Now, how this is done is through the Cloud Bridge component, and I'll quickly just jump into that to just show you high level how this is done. On the Cloud Bridge component, one has to just specify the username and password, and this is essentially done through this command over here. You add this, and essentially it will then add the credentials into your agent or your Cloud Bridge agent via Docker. You'll also notice over here I did a quick ping, and you'll notice it sits on AWS as well, just for those out there who wanted to see that. Okay, so now we can do a test connection, and we can connect to our local instance. Test was successful. Then we can specify what do we want to see. Okay, we need to specify the base DN. There's your base DN, and we want to get user account information. So now we have account information, and that's great. But I also want to collect the groups. So let's add another collector over here. Let's call it AD group, AD groups, AD groups, and it is a Cloud Bridge component as well. We'll specify the IP address. We'll do another test connection just to make sure we can communicate. And now we need to specify AD permissions. Okay, and let's just have to redo that. Okay, and that should be it. Do a test connection again. Okay, cool. And now you'll see object class as part of the groups, and we then just add the base DN for it, and that is it. So now let's save it. We have our two collectors configured over here, and it is successfully saved. So now for us to add or collect the information, we need to now run the collector. This is then done through just doing a collect. Okay, so now the collection's done. We'll do a publish now. Okay, so our publishing is done, and now we can go look at our application. So Active Directory, we've now collected the data, and it's as easy as that. We've collected the account information. Here we can see all the accounts. We can see that they are mapped, and essentially, and for instance, Anita Combs has a mapped account into 80. We can then also go look at the permissions. So here we've pulled in the groups. Here's the all user group. You can see all your 80 accounts mapped to your user groups. So this then essentially gives us the capability to go look into an identity. So we'll take the identity we looked into a bit earlier, and we can now drill down a bit more. Here we can see this user, the same user as now Nana, suddenly has an account tab associated to it. Here we can see it's an 80 account. We can also then go look into the permissions, and now we have 80 and the user groups pulling in over here. This essentially completes our story where we have an identity. We know what accounts are linked to an identity inside the organization, and we know what that account can do with its permissions. Now, that essentially paves the way to the next section, and that's reviews or attestations. Here we can now essentially start looking into doing reviews. Some of the type of reviews we can do is account reviews, unmapped account reviews. We can dig into some business role reviews, more into what permissions users have, technical roles, and even do direct report or profile reviews to essentially figure out who has access to what, number one, and try and figure out if a user needs to have that access or not. That also gives us the capability to start looking into separation of duty violations, where we can now look at accounts payable versus accounts receivable, for instance. This is just an example. And we can then have separation of duty violation and policies in place. So if access gets granted or given in future, the policy will be kicked off and an automatic review will be kicked off to identify essentially risky permissions or access inside your organization. It also then paves the way to business roles and technical roles and mining those roles. Here we can see a lot of roles. We can also then start mining them and try and identify what roles you have inside your organization that essentially leads up to doing access requests. And to give you an example here, we can do that as well. Here you can go to access requests and you'll see my profile or Andrew's profile. There's all his permissions. We can go and request access. It will then go for approval, and essentially the final part to this then is the fulfillment. We do have the capabilities to do automatic or manual fulfillment. You can configure it here. You'll see there's a manual fulfillment, but we can then also add Active Directory fulfillment so that when access is requested or access needs to be removed, that access then automatically gets removed, and we don't have to manually still have a process or a sheet or anything to go and manually click and remove a member from a group, for instance. We can now then integrate it into your identity governance solution, and fulfillment can happen automatically. That essentially is identity governance in a nutshell. I really hope you enjoyed the session, and I hope you found it insightful. Thank you very much.